Welcome to Policy Brief, an informed and engaging conversation with policymakers, policy influencers, and public sector professionals. I'm Trevor Brown. I'm Dean of the John Glenn College of Public Affairs and your host. For the last several iterations of Policy Brief, we really focused on COVID and its impact on the public sector. Had a lot of conversations with people at the state and local level. But not that COVID has diminished by any means. It's still obviously highly prevalent, but there are so many other things going on in the world and in the public policy sphere, not the least of which is an impending presidential transition. So for the next several episodes, we want to turn our attention to the federal government and look at what's happening on the federal scene. And starting today with a good friend of Ohio State University and the Glenn College, Tom Wheeler. Tom had a distinguished career in telecommunications on the private sector side, largely in the lobbying sphere, and ultimately became the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, perhaps best known for that during the Obama administration in the second term. But prior to that, Tom has served on the transition team that helped Obama come into office. So he has a lot of experience in this period of transition. And so even though we could talk a lot about exciting telecommunications issues, given his experience on the FCC, we're going to devote this conversation to talk about the presidential transition. So Tom, thanks for joining me today.
Hello, Trevor. It's great to be with you.
So let's just start by sort of setting the context here and talking about why is this transition period so important? We've spent so much time anguishing over the election. It feels like, can't we take a deep breath and get a little break, and then it'll all be taken care of on January 20th. You know, Biden just gives his 2-week notice to the prior job he had and says, hey, I'm here to show up and do the work. Why is this transition so critical?
Well, you know, it isn't quite that smooth on January 20th, because you know, this is the new president of the United States getting on to a moving train, and none of the things that the federal government is required to deal with have stopped. None of the challenges hit pause while they say, well, wait a minute, there's a new guy in town, let's just slow things down. No, the day after the swearing in, the afternoon of the swearing in, there are decisions that have to be made, and the preparation and the staff work that lead up to those decisions are the essential output of the transition effort. You know, the one that gets all the headlines is, well, who's going to get this job or who's going to get that job, which is a decision that the transition team makes. But the real work is that, I don't say that to denigrate the other work, but the work that gets less noticed is essentially staffing the first 100 days of the administration. What are the issues that are going to be coming up? What does the president-elect need to know? What do the new cabinet secretaries and other officials need to know? And to do all the necessary staff work, because they're going to move into a government that which a lot of people have just left. And so they need that kind of work done ahead of time.
So you've sort of put this in two boxes, and I want to take each in turn here. Part of it's the people, and then the part of it is the policies during that first 100 days. But let's start with the people. We hear a lot during this transitionary period, as you pointed out, about the team, the people that he will pull together and identify as cabinet secretaries, et cetera. Just paint that picture. You were on a transition team. What constitutes the team? Who is it? Just the cabinet secretaries, or is the focus in staffing this first 100 days? How deep does it go in terms of political appointees?
Well, it's interesting. When you start the transition team, there are no cabinet secretaries. There is nobody. So literally for the Obama-Biden transition, we started the effort in August.
Wow.
In the hopes that there would be a November
Right.
win.
Yep.
So that the day after the election, we were able to move into the agencies and really roll up our sleeves and would be informed, and ourselves wouldn't have to come up to speed. So we broke there were 6 of us in the policy group that broke the federal government down into 6 bite-sized chunks. I was responsible, for instance, for all the agencies that had anything to do with science, technology, space, and the arts. And so we put together teams in August to focus on each of the agencies inside that broad group. And the job pre-election was to learn as much as you could about the agency from public information. What are the issues? What are the budget? Who are the people? All of this kind of thing.
Yep.
So that on the day after the election, you'd be ready to walk in. There was an equivalent group that was overworking on the people side of the equation. And we cross-pollinated, obviously. And then as the appointees would be made known, they would come over and sit down with us on the policy side of the house and work through the kind of issues that were going to be on their desk when they showed up, so that they were up to speed and they were prepared for the confirmation hearings, where they will be asked about those kind of questions.
Yeah. So was there a playbook for this in August? Did you just pull out a manual, or how did you guys figure out how to organize into those two teams?
There was a playbook. And we were fortunate in our transition. John Podesta was the head of our transition. He had been through a previous transition. Some of my colleagues on this group that I was on had been through previous transitions. So yes, I mean, not everybody was a rookie, and there was a playbook.
So, I'm interested. So many of our graduates go on to be in the civil service. And so much of the transition is about the political appointees that are going to have to navigate confirmation. When do conversations start between political appointees and career civil servants? Is that something that happens January 20th, or
Not
during this
until the day after the transition? Typically, this time around, we didn't have that ability, but typically, the day after the election, you walk into the agency, or you're able to walk into the agency. I mean, when I was chairman of the FCC, obviously we had the 2016 election, and we prepared for the day after the election, and if there was going to be a new team, for that team to come in. We had office space for them. We had briefing books for them, all of which had been done in advance, in anticipation of the need for it. And so the discussion with the career staff begins immediately, or should begin immediately, after the election.
So let's talk about that. Share some experience there. So and let's describe this as what perhaps a normal transition would look like. It's 2016. We have a Trump victory. What had you prepared? What does it literally look like to have that? You said office space and materials. Expand on that a little bit. What goes into the preparation?
We were expecting they're called the landing team, because they land at the agency and then scope things out. We were expecting there would be a landing team that would show up the day after the election. Maybe I need to rephrase that. In a typical context, we would be expecting that. The fact that Donald Trump had had disbanded his transition efforts left us kind of wondering as to what it would be, and if anybody would show up and when they would show up. But we were still prepared for it, and as I say, had physical office space for them, and then each of the bureaus had, you know, big thick briefing books on what are the pending issues that that the new administration would have to worry about. And then obviously we were prepared to make available whatever staff was necessary to help the landing team come up to speed.
So, you know, that's a remarkable amount of preparation that has to go in to make the transition as seamless as possible. In normal circumstances, what would your expectation be for the level of interest that the president or president-elect would take in both the people and the policies? How much attention is given by the president to these issues? Or is it that layer down of folks who are going to be appointed as cabinet secretaries?
Well, there's a hierarchy of needs, like with anything else. Yeah, but at the same point in time, the big guy makes the final decision
Right.
on big questions. You know, so for instance, one of the things, the FCC was one of the agencies that I had responsibility for during the Obama transition. One of the issues at the FCC was that about 6 weeks after he was sworn in, we were going to throw the switch and the analog television broadcasting system would be shut down. And the next minute, a digital television system stood up, and that required new receivers, and moving antennas for TV stations and things like this. And as we studied it during the transition, we came to the conclusion that we weren't ready. The government wasn't ready for this. But this was a major decision. This was only every broadcaster and every TV set in America. And so we developed, and I took to the president-elect the recommendation that we needed to delay this so that we could do more work on it. But that required that legislation had to be passed by Congress, because it was Congress who had set the date for the transition. And so before the inauguration took place, we were up in Congress working with the appropriate committees of Congress to pass legislation that would extend that transition date. And as a matter of fact, the second piece of legislation that Barack Obama signed right after he signed the Lilly Ledbetter Act was the extension of the digital television transition. So that was an issue that went up to the big guys for a decision. Most administrative decisions during the transition don't reach that level, and get worked out at a senior staff level.
So you're walking us into the area I want to go next, which is around policy. But before we do that, I just want to talk. So you had to navigate the confirmation process, and so at the same time, as you say, you're walking onto a moving train and trying to figure out how to manage a team and identify policy priorities. First, you got to navigate a pretty complicated political environment. So how much of that transition period is getting ready for agency life, and how much of it is getting ready to navigate the confirmation process?
They're both major activities. You know, as the nominees become known, then they pair up with the subject matter experts on the transition team, and we've got briefing books for them. We had briefing books for them, and then we would hold murder boards, you know, where where a cabinet secretary would sit in front of several of us, and we would pretend that we were senators and pepper him with questions that he would have to that he should be expecting in the confirmation hearing.
So on the transition, you described your portfolio earlier of the science agencies and the arts and telecommunications, et cetera. Any surprises in that confirmation process? Anything come up that you didn't expect? Or did all that preparation, the murder boards, et cetera, make that go pretty smooth for the team that you all put together?
Yeah, that process was pretty smooth, because I mean it was a logical stepwise process of it. Learn the issues, pick the people, help the people get up to speed. It was a stepwise process.
But
I mean, the interesting thing was the things that you had to deal with that you never imagined.
Give me some examples.
One of the Commerce Department was one of the agencies under my group, and inside the Commerce Department is NOAA, the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and they had an agreement with the Navy that they had worked out about where the Navy could test depth charges and do depth charge training. And it was a specific environmental issue because that area also had happened at certain times of the year to be a breeding ground for migrating whales. So one day I discover suddenly I have to deal with whales, which wasn't exactly what I thought was in the tech portfolio when you first got it. And so you staff up that issue. You get into that. You learn what the pros and the cons are, and you staff up to make a recommendation. Because the day after the inauguration, somebody's going to have a whale answer.
Yep. Okay, so let's start talking policy. And you said one of the critical jobs, and it was sort of your portfolio on the policy side, is to staff that first 100 days. And part of that's the people, part of it's the policy. So first off, just 100's a nice round number, but why 100? Why is that such a critical period? Why isn't it 90? Why isn't it 180?
Oh, I think it could be. I mean, it wasn't. Nobody ever said that. Oh no, this is going to be 100 a day, 105. We can't. Right. No, it's just what are the issues that are going to be confronting you when you walk in the door, and how do you get out long enough? You go. What are the issues for the first 6 months? You're probably extending yourself too far into what somebody else's job should be, right?
So during that 100 days, so presumably, as you said, you're learning as much as you can about whales and depth charges and all sorts of other things that you never knew you needed to know stuff about. How do you start to sort out what the priorities are? How do you decide, as like when you came on at the FCC, albeit later in the term, how do you decide, I'm going to go pitch this to the president or Office of Management and Budget, whoever it might be, and say, this is a priority for us and in my agency, and we got to move forward on this?
Well, I mean, I think there are multiple tests that you go through. One is obviously what has the president-elect said during the campaign? What has he said in speeches? What have his position papers said? And that kind of forms the bedrock. Mm-hmm. But as you know, Trevor, the devil's in the details. And so then you go to the next step, which is how do you deal with some of the details that get raised in that process? And the great thing is that the team that is assembled, I mean, this is not their first rodeo.
Yeah.
I mean, for instance, with the Biden transition going on right now, the members of the Biden FCC transition team is one a former commissioner, and then all of the others are former members of my staff.
Mhm.
So they, you know, these are not things that they are unfamiliar with.
Yep. But I would imagine, so I appreciate you said you go back to what the candidate focused on as priorities, and thinking about the time we're in right now, there's so many priorities. So sort of lay those out for us, and how would you navigate those big presidential priorities to get your issue sort of front and center?
You know, that's what makes this transition truly different. Um, you know, the other thing that happens the day that the transition opens is that the everybody walks in the door saying, "Oh, I've just got one issue I want to talk to you about here. Oh, I just got this one thing," and and uh, the environment we're existing in right now um, prioritizes the ability to deal with things like that because we're facing a series of existential crises. And you know, go back to the Obama transition. Um, Everything that we did during that transition was seen through the prism of what's the impact on recovering from the recession, the Great Recession.
Yep.
And 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 we thought, oh my golly, and there's never been a transition like this that focuses so much on one issue, sees everything through one prism. Well, the Biden transition has 5 such existential issues
Lay them out. What are
that
they?
they've got to deal with. They got obviously the pandemic,
Yep.
the economy, social justice, climate change, and the fact that for the last 4 years, the government, which is essential for solving these other 4, has been hollowed out and confidence in the government has been lost. And so you've got this transition has a burden like none other.
Yeah.
And so the challenge becomes, how do you how do you prioritize policies that don't just rifle shot 1 or 2 of those, but are reflected across dealing with all of them because they all are interrelated. And but that is a different kind of a situation than most transitions have to face.
So advice, tips, tricks, how, if you're a new cabinet secretary, and you want to get your issue up front and center, how do you frame it in terms of those 5 existential challenges?
Well, I'll give you an example again. Back to the single challenge that I faced. You know, when we went to the president-elect Obama to say we needed to extend the digital television transition, I presented it in terms of, if we don't get something like this right, which touches every American, how can we ever hope that they will have any faith in our ability to do things to make the economy recover?
Yeah.
And so everything you do targets those issues. Today I would think, you know, so for instance, broadband policy. You know, the President-elect Biden has spoke during the campaign about the importance of connecting everybody, and during the pandemic, the importance of high-speed broadband connectivity has been proven to be an essential service. It affects the pandemic, it affects the economy, it affects social justice, it affects climate change. Okay, how do you put together there is a topic
Yeah.
that is universal in scope, affects all the 5 existential issues. How do you package that up? So what do you do inside the economic component? What do you do inside the pandemic component? And how do you bridge all those together into one package? And that's the challenge that they're facing and dealing with right now.
Crazy, crazy complicated. So we're coming to the end of this conversation, and I want to just ask you to give us some advice and guidance as informed but uninformed observers, in the sense that we don't have your level of experience and expertise. What should the average person who's watching the transition be looking to see, oh, this is going well, or oh, that's a warning sign that something's not going well during this transitionary period?
Well, we got off to a bad start. Let's start there. The transition is 77 days. Never in my life did 77 days go so fast or take so long, you know. And we lost 20% of those by all this fooling around and not allowing the transition to begin have discussions. We're still in a situation where the defense intelligence agencies haven't been allowed to discuss things with the transition. So what should you expect? First, we got off to a bad start. Second, however, is the team that is there, that the Biden administration has put together, this is not their first rodeo.
Mm-hmm.
They are seasoned policy people and seasoned managers. Everybody always thinks in terms of the political activities. Yes, obviously government is politics driven, but it's a management job.
Yeah.
And you need people in these roles who have made management decisions and have management experience. So I think we're in good grounds in that regard. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. I mean, if there is something that slips between the cracks, starting on that becomes obvious on January 21st, you can blame the transition for that. I mean, we look at what's going on with COVID right now. I mean, all of the effort that is going into how are you going to be fulfilling and disseminating not only the PPE, but also the inoculations for the immunization. How are you going to provide leadership about what Americans should expecting of themselves and each other? That's happening now, and unfortunately, like most things in government, you don't really notice the failures until it's too late. But I'm optimistic with this crew that we're not going to wake up and go, oh my God, why didn't we think about that? I will keep this from being political, but I can tell you that in the areas of technology policy that I've dealt with for the last 4 years since leaving office, there were massive areas that did not get taken care of because there wasn't really a Trump transition, and that put the country at a disadvantage and at risk.
So let's finish there. Tom, thanks for giving us some insight into this super complicated but super critically important process. I appreciate you spending some time with us and sharing your wisdom. I want you to stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, Trevor, and go Bucks.